I can remember first seeing Cadere, I think it was 1972 in Cologne, at the Cologne Art Fair. And I remember asking Conrad Fischer, who's that guy with the coloured stick? And he said, oh, I don't know, some crazy French guy. And I didn't really get to know Cadere until I was on an exchange of art critics between Studio International and Claypole Les Arts in Brussels. And he was around in Brussels quite a lot because I think the main dealer who kind of helped to establish him was Fernand Spillemark at MTL, and he was very close to Fernand. And I was sharing a house with Peter Downsborough, and I had a little room at the top of that house, and Cadere would drop by to talk with Peter. And so I started to get to know him. And I think he was one of the first East European artists that I really spent any time talking with. And I was always very curious about Eastern Europe. The sense of him coming from Romania was more interesting to me than him coming from Paris, because one knew quite a lot of French people. From that point, we started to talk very seriously. And whenever he was in London, he'd be talking about what was taking place in the art world. And he was very interested in my opinions. But it wasn't unique, really, to Cadere. Like, I've got a wonderful correspondence from John Baldessari at that time, in the early 70s. And there he was in California. And he kind of used me as a sounding board to find out what was happening between the galleries and the dealers and who was showing with who. And it was the days before the internet, the days before really being able to telephone people. And so letters and postcards were quite important in that sense. And I think nearly all the artists were really interested in what the dealers were up to and what was happening in London, what was happening in Germany. So whenever I was travelling to Europe, I'd usually bump into Cadere, and we'd sit down and have a beer together and talk about what seemed to be going on. And it was quite a kind of active period, 74, 75, and then working with him in 76, both in terms of being asked by Studio to write an article on Cadere. And we decided the article would have two sections, a text by me, but the main part of it was going to be a chronology of Cadere's appearances and his appearances at other artists' exhibitions, at Kunstmarks, and at the sort of major large museum exhibitions in Cologne or Amsterdam, and he was also travelling a lot in Italy in those days. And so this sense of his appearances was actually quite a kind of dominant thing, and the way in which he was talking the whole time about Iliana this and Conrad that and Fernand doing this and Yvonne in Paris, and this watching of the art world was absolutely key to how he thought about his work. And I don't think he thought so much of other artists. It was the dealers who he knew would either would hopefully make his career, and that's what he was developing an expertise in. And it's been very strange for me seeing more recent exhibitions of Cadere. I was involved with the text for the Baden-Baden exhibition, but then they'd brought out this catalogue raisonné of Cadere, and it was just the different coloured round bars of wood. And the exhibition itself was a marvellous collection of all Cadere's different sizes, different lengths of round bars of wood. And there were a couple of vitrines, but the papers were just kind of in a mess, scattered out in the vitrines. And I thought there's something wrong here, that Cadere didn't see himself as a minimal painter or a minimal sculptor. He was about something else, and that it was the group of documents that he gave me when I came to be producing both this chronology and this article, which really was the essence of Cadere, and that's what I tried to bring together and focus on. And I think people like Anton Herbert and Massimo Menini, Barry Barker, who also worked with Cadere in those days and knew him well, agreed with me totally that this exhibition represents the Cadere that they remember. We decided we would have just one round bar of wood in the show as a demonstration of what the objects were, but that we would concentrate on the documents, and particularly the documents that Cadere himself produced. Or there's a few occasions where there's groups of photographs that either Cadere took himself or he had taken specifically to document an event that he was at. It was really thinking what to put on the catalogue cover that was quite a kind of watershed for me. How we would represent Cadere. And I wanted to represent this idea of him having a kind of performative element was absolutely key. You know, the carrying, the appearance in public. As I had this poster with Gilbert and George, and Gilbert and George's photograph of Cadere, and Cadere's photograph of Gilbert and George, which was something MTL had produced around about 74. And I thought that that just explained perfectly both the relationship between them, because Cadere and Gilbert and George became very close friends, and they would always appear together. He would appear at their exhibitions, and if they were in town, they would appear at his activities, and certainly there would be evenings out drinking with Cadere. And so I felt that that poster, and to keep the catalogue cover as plain as possible, was the best possible explanation of the shift that I wanted to make from Cadere being seen as a new painter, new sculptor of conceptualism, to saying, well, you know, he really is a performance artist, and the round bars of wood, it was nice to sell them, but they're really the remains of the performance by the man. And so I had this tape that was still in relatively good condition, that I'd made in my kitchen in Islington in London in '76 as part of the process of putting the article together. And I thought how nice it would be not only to have the book with this performative element, but actually to be able to sit in the exhibition or the privacy of one's own home, to listen to the man talking about his work. And it was strange because I'd worked a lot. I'd transcribed the tape and I had published it already. But when I sat and listened to the tape again, thinking about this project, alongside my transcription of it, I realized how much is lost in a transcription of the voice, so much of the meaning, and this incredible fruitiness, I think I've always called it, of the French-Romanian accent that Cadere had, and the way in which his emphasis changed the meaning from how it had kind of settled in my mind from transcribing the tape, that there was another layer of meaning there, which I hope people will get. I had a very nice email from someone just the other day saying how sad he found the tape of listening to Cadere. You know, that most of the figures of this period have survived and had long lives, but Cadere was the one who was cut off. But he wasn't of the first generation of conceptual art. You know, it's 72 before he starts appearing around the place at international exhibitions. It's really 74 before he begins to find his feet in the contemporary art world. And so he is of a second generation. And that's also been something that he's not one of the major figures or major names, and he's been left aside in that sense. Well, he played a twin game because he wanted shows with dealers. And he quite liked being able to sell a round bar of wood. I think at different stages it was 300 or 700 French francs for 10 centimetres or something. And so he was selling them, and that income was quite important to him. But he was also very frugal, and I don't think he had very much money. He would usually stay with friends in whichever city he was going to. So although he paid his travel, people put him up and looked after him, and he became a guest. But he liked that idea that he was playing a game, but at the same time he would go along with the dealers, and he needed the dealers. And he wasn't trying to undermine the dealers in that sense. He knew that they were important, and he wanted to see his work taken on by them. And he did fairly well, as you can see from the cards in the exhibition. All sorts of people like Speroni and Torselli in Italy gave him 1-day or 2-day exhibitions. He didn't take up a lot of time. It was often just a couple of hours in an evening at a gallery. And he had this desire to show with Conrad Fischer, but he never achieved it. Conrad never showed any desire to show Cadere. He liked him, he would have a beer with him, but there was never the offer of an exhibition. And for Cadere, he had that sense that the network of European galleries, that Conrad was at the centre of that network. And so Conrad was the one gallery he really, really wanted to show with. You know, it was the gallery of Carl André, of Daniel Buren, Gilbert and George, of Richard Long, of all the kind of key artists of conceptual art of that period. And he just couldn't get Conrad to do even a couple of hours with him. And finally, in '76, he devised the plan to work with the Galerie Kiki Meyer in Düsseldorf during the Kunstmarkt, the week of the Kunstmarkt. And for each day, he would appear at a different gallery or event with his round bar of wood. And I think on the Tuesday or the Wednesday, he announced on the invitation card that he would appear at Conrad Fischer's gallery. And Anton Herbert, who I worked with, and the documents I didn't have, Anton has supplied for this touring exhibition. He went all the way down from Ghent to be in Düsseldorf for this event because he knew the importance of it to Cadere. And there is the photograph in the exhibition, not of Cadere at Conrad Fischer's, but Cadere's round bar of wood. And Cadere, when he went somewhere, would always position the round bar of wood next to the door. I don't know, like you would leave your umbrella when you come in somewhere, but it was always placed next to the door. Conrad evidently was very nice and very friendly with him, and he stayed for half an hour in the gallery, and that was his Conrad Fischer exhibition. So he played with these kind of ideas and these issues. But there's a particularly important piece here, which I always like to talk to people about. Again, 1976. I think 1976 is the great year of Cadere. how we've organised the show is the different years. 75 is quite a good year, he's getting into the swing of everything. But then 76 is the great year. And it's during this period that he then starts to become ill in 77 and things tail off. But he sent this mailing to the international art world, Espace et Politique, which was a lecture that he gave quite often. He did about 10 different versions of it at this time. But this particular one, and he sent this to me in London, he sent it to Herbert in Ghent, and I suspect he sent it to people in America, Paris and Germany, announcing that he was going to have a discussion on this topic of space and politics in a bus shelter at Saint-Germain-des-Prés, and just for 2 hours in the evening, that he was inviting the international art world to come. And of course he didn't really expect people to turn up, maybe a few people did in Paris, but it was to make visible this idea of space and politics. And he starts in 1976 to do these lectures on space and politics. And what he's really saying is that the ownership, all galleries that artists are dependent upon, are owned by someone or other. And that ownership implies a politics, whether you're talking about the Museum of Modern Art in New York, or you're talking about Artist Space, or you're talking about one of the dealer galleries in Chelsea. The ownership of the space, whoever pays for it, is quite more dominant than the artists that they show. That when you go to the Museum of Modern Art, you're reacting to it in terms of all the other visits that you've made to the Museum of Modern Art and all the other artists and work that you're used to seeing there. And so if you suddenly come across Caderet's round bar of wood, you're not so much reacting to Cadere as the context in which it's being shown. And he thinks this is terribly important, and it's not anything that is acknowledged. And I think that from my memories of conversations with him, this was within 6 months or so of Carl André and the bricks crisis at the Tate Gallery. And I think it was the way in which Carl's bricks became the kind of crisis, the symbol of the crisis of people not understanding the kind of value system of conceptual art and why it was important when it was just ordinary materials. And I think this idea of space and politic was to do with a sympathy from Caderet's point of view that Carl was being blamed for the Tate spending money on his work, whereas, you know, the issues were the museum wanting to buy that kind of work, but the way in which the publicity around the museum turns those kind of crises into a problem for the individual artist, not to look at the issues for themselves. And I think that's where he starts to do these lectures on space and politics, which are quite important. To show another example of his thinking at this time, he did 2 shows in London. One was at the ICA, which is funded by the Arts Council, so it's like official government expenditure. And it's right on the Mall, just up the road from Buckingham Palace, so it's got all sorts of contemporary art prestige around it. And this is Barry Barker, who was running the ICA at that time. And Cadere was there, I think, just for a week. And he was there each day between 12 and 3 p.m. And I knew Cadere was coming for this, and I was running a programme of visitors at the Slade School at University College at that time. And I asked Cadere to come and give a lecture. And he said, no, I don't want to give a lecture. I have an idea. What we'll do is go to 8 different pubs, 8 nights in a row in London. And I'll be there, what was it, for an hour or 2 hours? Yeah, from 8 till 9 o'clock each evening. But it wasn't just any old pub. It was Nigel Greenwood's pub, it was the Listen Gallery pub, it was Situation Gallery pub, it was Studio International's pub, it was Jack Wendler's pub. And he said that it wasn't at the official institution that paid for him to be in London and gave him a fee and found a hotel and everything for him. But it was actually the student project in the pubs where all the key people in London who he really wanted to see his work and talk about his work, that's where they all came. And this was his kind of thinking about it, that often it's these off-site little projects which for him had the most important impact. A show he did with Yvon Lambert, which was the most important gallery from his point of view in Paris at that time. And we only have half the invitation card here, but in the catalogue we have the whole invitation card. And these two were perforated. If you look carefully, you can see the perforation down the side. And what he did was to tear the perforated invitation in half. And Yvon Lambert sent out the official invitation to his mailing list. But Cadere simply went on the street, handing out to people in cafes. With this one has his name at the top, as opposed to the gallery name on the official invitation. And this was again testing these limits of the gallery and social interaction with people. And he did this project with Hal Broom, which was to go to those numbers on West Broadway. And I just automatically thought, oh, West Broadway was galleries in those days in Soho. It was where Ileana Sonnabend, Castelli, John Webber all had their galleries. And in fact, he did go to 420 Broadway where those galleries were. But most of the other places he went to were like a dry cleaner's shop or a stationery shop or a little cafe, a sandwich bar. And he had himself documented at each of those events. This is a Belgian magazine of the period called Plus One Zero, if you come round this way. And this is him doing a walk in Paris for the Galerie des Locataires. And then he does exactly the same walk in Paris as his exhibition at MTL. So he's not even going to Belgium at this time, but just the documentation of him making the same walk within 6 months. The material here is just looking at the way in which Paris was rocked by May 68. Not only Paris, but the Venice Biennale. We had the big Grosvenor Square demonstration in London, and then there were big demonstrations at Documenta 4, which opened in 68. And so this kind of revolutionary moment in Europe at the height of the Vietnam War was something that I think quite profoundly affected Cadere. And I think led to the kind of thinking that led him to stop being a painter and start to work with this kind of object that he could carry with him. Another nice little story are these very early images here. This is Cadere with his round bar of wood in 72, showing it to Harold Zeeman, who was then putting together Documenta 5 in Kassel. And Cadere was saying, I'm a poor Romanian artist, I have no money to go to Germany for your exhibition. I suppose I could walk. And Zeman liked so much this idea of the poor East European artist walking from Paris to Kassel. But in fact, somehow or other, Cadere got the money together to catch the train. And Zeman was putting him not as an official part of the exhibition, but in the unofficial program. But he was so upset that Cadere came on the train and didn't walk that he refused to put Cadere into the official program. And Cadere seems to have really savoured and enjoyed these confrontations with people over issues and over their expectations of the poor East European artist. When he was working with me and describing the system of always having a mistake in each round bar of wood, there would be a system of permutations, but he'd always make sure that there was one thing that made a mistake. And this is the sheet he drew for me, explaining that system. I think that's really touched everything. Yeah.